Hello, welcome. Psalm chapter 76, the majesty of God in judgment. I might title this the Psalm of Armageddon, and it's to the chief musician on stringed instruments, a psalm of Asaph, a song. Okay, so Psalm 76, we're in the third book of the book of Psalms. It's broken up into different books. And this one in particular is regarding this section of the book of Psalms is themed and focused on the sanctuary, the tabernacle, and corresponds really to the book of Leviticus, the third book of the Torah, and which is which is about the tabernacle. So, uh, right in that stream of thought here, we open up with in Judah, God is known. His name is great in Israel, in Salem, also in his tabernacle, in his dwelling place in Zion. So there you have several names of regarding references to the tabernacle. Salem, we know that the tent was set in Salem, and that was the place of God, the dwelling place of God for a number of years before it was the ark and everything was brought to Jerusalem. We have the tribe of Judah there, which of course is where we see Jerusalem. And the point is, Jerusalem marks the spot. Jerusalem the is the future dwelling place of Jesus Christ, the Messiah. Verse 3, there he did what? Well, he broke the arrows of the bow, the shield and sword of battle. So this is a military spot, and it's also going to be where he establishes his kingdom, Selah. All right, so this particular battle, we have a kind of a famous name for it. We call it Armageddon. And in Revelation chapter 16, the nations of the world that are coming against Israel gather in the valley of Megiddo, and that's where we get the word Armageddon, Megiddo. But it's not until Revelation 19 that we see that battle take place, and it's fleshed out there in that chapter. So I would suggest reading Revelation chapter 19 if you kind of want to bone up on this, on what's going on in this battle. I would also have you look at Micah chapter 4 and Zechariah 14. And these are all, a few of the places that kind of give some pretty vivid detail about what's going to happen during that battle. The basics are that basically it's not even much of a battle. Jesus at the second coming comes to deliver his people who are surrounded by the world powers, the beast, the Antichrist, and the the whole tribulation period is leading up to this time. And then God, or Jesus, I'm sorry, the second coming of Christ happens. Jesus shows up, and he, with like a sword out of his mouth, it says, just completely destroys. Now, what's interesting in Zechariah 14, I'll turn there for a second here. In Zechariah 14, it describes a plague, uh, chapter 14, verse 12. And this shall be the plague with which the Lord will strike all the people who fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh shall dissolve while they stand on their feet. Their eyes shall dissolve in their sockets, and their tongues shall dissolve in their mouths. And then there's a great panic, and it goes on if you want more detail there. Then in Revelation 19, it talks about when Christ comes on this white horse, who's called faithful and true and in righteousness. Verse 11, he judges and makes war. His eyes were like a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns. And let's see. I'm looking for the place. Oh, here he is in verse 17. So Revelation 19:17. Then I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the birds that fly in the midst of heaven, come and gather together for the supper of the great God, that you may eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of captains, the flesh of mighty men, the flesh of horses and of those who sit on them, and the flesh of all people, free and slave, both small and great. And these beasts, the kings, the armies, all these powers are making war. And then it says, okay, in verse 21, and the rest were killed. So he throws the Antichrist and the false prophet into the lake of fire alive, and then the rest were killed in verse 21 with the sword that proceeds from the mouth of him who sat on the horse, and all the birds were filled with their flesh. So if you put at least even just those two passages together, what you're seeing here is a pretty vivid picture of what is going to happen at Armageddon. And Christ is bringing judgment to the nations, and he's going to deliver Israel, and he's going to do it with his words, with a sword like coming out of his mouth, and it's going to be quite gruesome. When your eyes are, your tongue are dissolving, your skin's dissolving while you're standing up. There's birds that are going to be coming in and devouring the flesh of these people. So really, it's really not even much of a battle. It's just it's a terror. There's not like corresponding fighting back and forth, is what I'm saying there. And so it's going to be awesome, and something to that is going to strike fear in those who are opposing the Messiah. So verse 4, it says, "You are more glorious and excellent than the mountains of prey," speaking of the nations. "The stout-hearted were plundered. They have sunk into their sleep, and none of the mighty men have found the use of their hands." So that's a kind of a metaphor for being helpless. Verse 6, "At your rebuke, O God of Jacob, both the chariot and horse were cast into a dead sleep." And so, when a general is speaking about, let's say, tanks being destroyed, he's also speaking of the people using the tanks. He's not just speaking of the tank themselves. So those who are using these chariots and horses, or whatever these things are, they will be cast into a dead sleep. "You yourself are to be feared, and who may stand in your presence," excuse me, "and who may stand in your presence? When once you were angry, you caused judgment to be heard from heaven. The earth feared and was still, when God arose to judgment, to deliver all the oppressed of the earth." Selah. Verse 10, "Surely the wrath of man shall praise you. With the remainder of wrath you shall gird yourself." So that's it's a little tough to understand, I guess, but um, I'm thinking that this verse, "The wrath of man shall praise you, and the remainder of wrath shall gird you. You shall gird yourself." Perhaps it's sort of like when David killed Goliath, and he took Goliath's sword and decapitated him, and then carried his head and his sword all around for miles, and actually used his sword. He girded himself with that sword of Goliath. Um, Actually, later in life, when he was perhaps a little larger and stronger, and was able, as a full-grown adult, to use that sword, after he found that in the temple a number of years later. So it's the idea that Jesus is going to basically wear the wrath that he's poured out on the enemies of Israel. He's going to wear it as like a trophy or sword. That's how I'm taking verse 10. Verse 11, "Make vows to the Lord your God and pay them. Let all who are around him bring presents to him who ought to be feared." The Lord ought to be feared, not just then when he's pouring out the judgment on the earth, but but now, that God is to be feared. This book started off that was saying that the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. If you don't have an awesome, holy fear of God, something grounded in, wow, he is God, I am not. He is one who, just because he hasn't tied up all the loose ends yet, doesn't mean that he won't. Just because he hasn't done all that he could in bringing judgment immediately to any sin that's ever been committed doesn't mean that he won't. I mean, we even have, if you think about Adam and Eve, when they sinned, God didn't just zap them right then and kick them out of the garden. There was enough time, apparently, for them to make clothes and to experience shame and to hide and all of that. And um, and it's possible that Satan himself wasn't even held accountable until that chapter 3 of Genesis, where he God deals with them each one by one, Adam, and then Eve, and then Satan, the serpent. So um, the one like a serpent. And so there's a judgment coming just because it hasn't been dealt out yet. It's sort of like you might be free on bond, but the bounty hunter's gonna come bring you to the courtroom, and so there's judgment coming. Just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean that there's not something to be feared. And there's many who are um, who are very comfortable in this world, comfortable in their state, their current state, and that's a shame because um, uh, there is something to be feared. You and I have a serious problem. We've offended the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, with our sin. We have fallen short of his glory, and we are deserving of what our works have purchased for us, which is eternal separation from God, death. Now, I don't want to hyper focus on sin and death and destruction and all that stuff, but it's not really spoken of a lot. Um, and so maybe I'm overcompensating, but we have a serious problem, and that problem is solved through the work of Jesus Christ, who in advance provided a solution for the judgment that is to come. And that is that he laid down his life in your place, in my place, for all those that God is calling to himself. He has done the work. He has provided the lamb that was slain on our behalf, that we might experience the remission, the forgiveness of sins, the atoning sacrifice applied to our soul, and that we might, believing in him, might experience eternal life. And so, have you dealt with your problem? Have you dealt with that issue personally? It's one thing to talk about the end times and Armageddon and talk about, oh, like just the way the nations are going these days in our nation. And it's like, oh, but hey, what about you? Are you right with God? Have you put your trust in him and in him alone, that his blood would be applied to your soul, that he would resurrect you unto eternal life, rather than having you stand before him on account of your own works and being judged accordingly? It's your choice. I choose resurrection unto eternal life through Jesus Christ. So that's my prayer for you as well. Put your faith in Jesus Christ today. All right. God bless you. If you've already trusted him, then today may your faith be renewed, encouraged, and strengthened. All right. Have a good day.